Talking about the weather is often described as Britain's favourite pastime. So it's surprising that when the weather becomes genuinely interesting, a nation of self-appointed experts can't seem to agree on much at all. Open the windows. Buy a fan. Fans are useless. Draw the curtains. It's summer. What did you expect? Or whatever you do, don't open the windows. And whether we love a hot summer's day or hate it, we'll usually spend at least part of it complaining about the heat, or about the people complaining about it. But there's one thing most of us can agree on. Summer nights in the city aren't always pleasant. The problem isn't simply that London gets hot, but that long after the sun has disappeared, so much of it can still feel as though the day hasn't ended yet. So why does London find it so difficult to cool down? More than 2 centuries ago, a London pharmacist called Luke Howard began measuring the city's temperature. Howard is better remembered as the man who gave clouds names such as cirrus, cumulus and stratus. But he also discovered that London was creating a climate of its own. Temperatures recorded inside the city differed from those beyond it, and the additional warmth was especially noticeable at night. Some of the reasons were obvious. Early 19th century London was crowded with people, fires, workshops and industry. But Howard also recognised something more permanent in the shape of the city itself. Buildings obstructed the wind. Dry streets provided less moisture for evaporation. Narrow spaces behaved differently from open land. And after the sun had warmed London's walls and roads, those surfaces continued releasing heat into the evening. London wasn't simply receiving the weather, it was modifying it too. A century and a half later, the geographer Tony Chandler returned to the same question. Howard had shown that London differed from the surrounding country. Chandler wanted to know how much London differed from itself. His researchers drove around the city at night, measuring temperature and humidity as they travelled through open land, suburbs, and dense central districts. London, it turned out, was a patchwork. A paved commercial street could remain warmer than a nearby park. A neighbourhood with gardens could cool differently from one dominated by buildings and roads. Open land, vegetation, and building density all altered the pattern. And that pattern was often most apparent after sunset. In open country, heat could escape more freely towards the sky. Vegetation and moist ground provided additional cooling. But London's roads, walls and roofs continued releasing the energy they had absorbed during the day. The evening may have arrived, but the city was still dealing with the afternoon. The Central Line is perhaps London's most famous example of a system struggling to lose heat. The trains generate heat. Braking generates heat. Passengers, motors, lighting and electrical equipment all contribute. But much of the line actually runs above ground, where the trains and carriages are also exposed to direct sunlight. And when they enter the deep tunnels beneath central London, they continue generating heat in an environment where there are far fewer ways for it to escape. When the railway was built, it had one useful advantage. The clay surrounding the tunnels was cooler and could absorb much of the heat produced by the railway. Over decades of operation, that clay gradually warmed. The system depends on the environment around it remaining cooler, so it can absorb the heat and carry it away. Once the surrounding environment gets warmer, the system loses part of its ability to cool itself. But this isn't just a problem in tunnels. The same principle applies to thousands of homes across London. Much of Britain's housing stock relies on a simple form of cooling: windows. When a building becomes warmer than the air outside, opening a window allows cooler air to remove some of that heat. But that only works if the air outside is actually cooler. If the street remains warm after sunset, opening the window may do very little to reduce the temperature indoors. The railway beneath London depended on cooler ground around it. Homes above depend on cooler air outside. In both cases, once the surroundings warm up, part of the cooling system stops working as well. But even on the same street, some homes cope much better than others. Two homes can stand in the same weather and experience it very differently. One may be shaded by trees or by the building itself. Another may face directly into the afternoon sun. One may have windows on more than one side. Another may have them all facing in the same direction. A top-floor flat beneath an exposed roof will behave differently from a ground-floor home beside a garden. Even insulation isn't quite as simple as it sounds. While insulation helps homes retain heat during the cold winter months, in summer it can also help keep unwanted heat outside. But once heat has entered through windows, roofs, appliances or people, insulation can also slow the rate at which that heat leaves. And heavy materials such as brick and concrete can absorb heat during the day and remain warm into the night. Even the age of a building does not, by itself, tell us how well it will cope. What matters is what the building is exposed to, what surrounds it, and whether the heat has somewhere to go. A Victorian terrace isn't automatically comfortable, and a modern development isn't automatically an oven. The same weather can produce very different outcomes. But buildings are only part of the difference, and a very hot home isn't automatically where the greatest risk lies. Consider a west-facing, top-floor flat above a busy road. It may still be taking direct sunlight late in the day, while its only windows open onto traffic and noise. The person living there may be older, live alone, and have nowhere cooler to go. Someone in a home that's just as hot may have another room, a garden, a cooler workplace, or family nearby. So temperature tells us where the heat is. It does not, by itself, tell us where the greatest risk is. And many of the familiar solutions depend on options that aren't available to everyone. Open the windows assumes the air outside is cooler, that noise, pollution, or security don't make that impractical, and that they haven't been painted shut. Move to a cooler room assumes there is another room. Install shading assumes the person can alter the building and afford the work. What sounds like simple advice often contains a much longer list of assumptions. So if the home can't be cooled, the next question is whether there's anywhere nearby that can. During the summer, the city maintains a map of designated cool spaces. Libraries, museums, community buildings, parks, and other places where people can rest and recover during hot weather. A library is not normally thought of as part of London's climate infrastructure, but during extreme heat it can become a place of refuge. The same is true outdoors. A mature tree does more than make a street look attractive. It intercepts sunlight before it reaches the person, pavement, or building below. A bench beneath that tree offers something very different from an identical bench in full sun. And drinking water, public toilets, and somewhere accessible to sit can determine whether a person is able to remain away from an overheated home for several hours. But a cool space is only useful if someone can reach it and remain there. It may be open only during the day. The journey may involve a hot walk, a bus, or a train. And someone who's already frail or unwell may be the least able to travel in search of relief. Even then, a few hours in a library, museum, or park can only offer temporary respite. It can't cool the home the person has to return to later in the day. One obvious answer is air conditioning, and it works. An air conditioning system can cool an interior even when the air outside is too warm to provide useful ventilation. For some buildings, and for some medically vulnerable people, active cooling may become increasingly difficult to avoid. But air conditioning does not make the heat disappear, it just moves it. The heat removed from the room is released outside. One unit makes almost no difference to the temperature of London, but large numbers of them can add heat to already warm streets while increasing demand for electricity. And access to that cooling is uneven. A homeowner may be able to install a permanent system. A tenant might not have permission. A portable unit can be expensive to run and still need somewhere to exhaust the heat it removes. Meanwhile, an office, shop or hotel can remain comfortably cool while the street outside becomes hotter. Air conditioning solves the room more easily than it solves the city. That doesn't mean London should reject it. There are buildings and circumstances where passive measures just won't be enough. But the more heat that can be kept out in the first place, the less has to be removed later. External shading can stop sunlight before it crosses the glass. Ventilation can help when the air outside is genuinely cooler. Trees can shade streets and buildings. Fans can make people feel cooler even without reducing the temperature of the room. Mechanical cooling can then deal with what remains. Air conditioning will almost certainly be part of London's response to hotter weather, but the less heat the city allows into its homes, streets and buildings in the first place, the less it has to remove afterwards. England's building regulations now recognise overheating as a design problem in many new residential buildings. Designers must consider how much heat a building gains from the sun and provide ways for excess heat to escape. But the hardest buildings are not those still waiting to be built, they're the ones already occupied. Most of the homes people will live in over the coming decades already exist. And in London in particular, a resident may own the inside of a flat, but not the outside of the building. The facade may be shared. Alterations may be restricted by planning, conservation, fire safety, or the terms of a lease. And the pavement, trees and public space outside may be controlled by someone else entirely. The same fragmentation continues across the city. A council can plant trees in a public space, but it can't alter every privately owned home. A landlord can change a building, but not the street around it. National government controls building regulations. City Hall can coordinate strategy. Boroughs control many local spaces and planning decisions. Every part of the heat problem is controlled by someone, but nobody controls the whole system, and a resident might not control any of it. London's first dedicated heat plan reflects a growing recognition that extreme heat is no longer only a matter of temporary health advice. It affects homes, transport, public space, and essential services across the city. But recognising the problem is not the same as changing the city. The work has to happen across millions of homes, buildings and streets controlled by different people and organisations. London doesn't lack possible answers. The difficulty is applying them across an old, occupied and fragmented city. After sunset, the windows open again. Behind each one is a room trying to lose heat into the city outside. Whether it succeeds depends on the building, the street below, the trees nearby, the movement of air, and the choices available to the person inside. What may appear to be a collection of separate problems, a hot bedroom, an uncomfortable train, an exposed pavement, is part of the same larger system. London absorbs heat during the day. It releases it slowly at night. And some buildings and people have far fewer ways to escape it than others. The real test is not whether London can endure the hottest afternoon. It's whether the city can cool down before the next one begins.